for example, I'm very interested in family constellation, if you've come across that kind of...
Jonathan wants to talk to you all about it. Let's get into it. I'm just going to say right now, and I'll let you explain it, I don't buy it. I don't understand it. I can't imagine a world where Jonathan's talked about it. He's like, well, this person pretended to be my father and I got out all the things I needed to say. It would never work for me. Tell us about family constellation therapy.
Also, just for context, I've explained it to her 16 different times. We've spoken about it on the podcast.
Nope.
She still has no concept. I've invited her to join me. She's like, I can't go. Because until you experience it,
no,
it's very hard to imagine it. And once you do experience it, and this will make sense to anyone who's listening once you explain it a little bit more, but until you become a representative in a constellation and you step into the role of whatever family system the person receiving the constellation is having, and all of a sudden you don't know anything about the person in front of you, and yet you feel so intensely in your body emotions and visceral sensations that you couldn't possibly make up because there's no context for which to make them up. All of a sudden, the veil between the known and the unseen is so thin that it's frightening.
It is frightening. That I will agree with you. It's frightening. Let's let Dr. Whiteley explain it.
Absolutely. So I came into it. I'm always interested in how healers work. You know, what is it? How do they intuit and why? There's a cue and people report being well. And, you know, I was growing up and my mom took me to all the healers that there were. She, for some reason, thought they absolutely need to be healed. And that I was frightened by a dog, and perhaps I was, you know, cured of that. I don't know. But, you know, it's sort of the belief is that if the child is frightened, it will have an effect on them down the line. And so I have come across, you know, all sorts of, usually it's women and elderly women, and sometimes they were not, you know, I guess not that elderly looking at it now from my position.
They were 35, which seemed ancient at the time.
Yeah, totally. But they always, I felt something. I felt something being in their presence, and they would be whispering, and I would always be listening to what are they whispering? Like, what is this? And a lot of the times they would be whispering about, like, let's say, as the sunrise will set, as the sun will rise, you know, something will happen, and as the sun will set, that will dissipate, or something. As the river flows, it will clear. Let's say, you know, just almost like attaching the symptoms to nature. And I came across this not once, and I was, you know, curious about it, and like, but it kind of remained as that. And so about, is it 8 years ago, I think, I heard about family constellation, and we had a friend who came from Siberia, and she's a geneticist, and was working in Academ City. So it's like the most prestigious place for scientists in Soviet Union and Russian Federation. And she was, you know, struck by what was happening to the science then, where they couldn't be paid, and she had to find the way to basically find the way to income, because she was paying for science that she was not being paid, but she was paying for her own experience from her own pocket. At the Academ cities. So she came across this method. I don't remember what was the query, but she was very skeptical, you know, being a geneticist and a scientist. And then she stood, and she was kind of on the outskirts, listening in. But then, ironically, when she was teaching us, and if you know, Jonathan, the background is that you generally work with generations, or what happened across generations. And she says, it dawned on me many years later that I am still working with generations, or, you know, in a sense, with some capacity of genetics. And, you know, let's say this is a coincidence, right? As we discussed before. But I was also in the same skeptical way when I began. And we were doing very simple exercise, and when I go in, I wanted to experience it in order for me to, in my mind, even if I can't articulate it, because that's what I'm interested, I wanted to viscerally experience it so I can tap into it. And so one of the constellation we were doing something called Approach. Jonathan, remind me the name of the founder, Bert
Hellinger.
Bert Hellinger. So he was grew up training in religion as a priest, and then he went to Africa to, share the faith. And then he came back, and that's what he brought back to Europe. And I understand that he picked this up from traditions in Africa. And part of his observation is that if family is positioned, or when they're talking to each other, that if they're positioned in a certain way, that they have a better flow of love through the family, whatever that may mean to us. He was starting to explore with that. And if you place people in a certain position, it seems to be the situation or discussion or the flow or how people feel seem to open up, or the release happens. So that physical placement. And so that's kind of one, if you wish, the element of that. But also when the idea in family constellation is that you sit down and you start talking. So there is a request or we're forming the intention or what the query might be. And it's actually quite pertinent to get the request right before you do a constellation. And the request is actually formed not on a question, I want, like more money, or I want to resolve the conflict. Usually it starts there. Or, I don't know which house to buy, for example, could be very practical. Or, whatever that might be. But what you're going to is that you as a, master who is holding the constellation, you need to find the feeling of where it was either felt that way, something familiar. It doesn't have to be in childhood, but somewhere where you felt that either what you don't like or what you do like, depending on what your goal is for the outcome. And let's say we have a feeling that, I seem to be getting always into argument with a particular relative. And so you go to that situation where you had that feeling most viscerally right now. It could be nothing to do with the current situation that you have, but you go as earliest memory.
First or worst is what they call it.
Yeah. So, and you're going to that feeling of what you're experiencing now. When did you recall it first? And it might be almost nothing to do with that relative either. But you go to that feeling and something comes up, which in, being trained as a clinical psychologist will take to you years to get there. But here you get it in an instant through the feeling. So, and then the idea is that you go down to that feeling of what you're experiencing. And based on that, with the person who is holding the space for constellation, you decide which figures you're going to put in the field. And you start with the fewest number of figures or people. And depending on what that scenario was, where you were feeling this first, you start to invite people who would be those figures. And that is done with permission. And I think that's a key too. So let's say I would come to Jonathan and I would say, Jonathan, would you be my father? And Jonathan would agree or not.
I ask him that all the time. It's not weird at all.
And so then I would, place my hands on the shoulders at the back and would go with the feeling that I'm having and place them somewhere in the room, somewhere, doesn't matter where. And it's kind of detached from the feeling. And then let's say there's a sibling, and I would say, Mayim, would you please be my sibling? And that agreement is almost like a gate. It's surrender to an opportunity to be in that situation. So let's play whatever the game would be. Let's, playing a surfing game, and so you would go in the field, and then somebody would stand for me, for my own figure. And I would also ask them and then place them in the field. And then we let that field to stand, and people would be positioned in a certain way. And almost first thing that comes is that you see how we, the person who made a request or I, position the people. So will they be looking at each other, not looking at each other, whether they will be, turning or not turning to each other. But something happens and you almost feel either like you feel the surge of energy. You develop the feelings for that person whom you're looking at, and you have no precedent for it.
So how do we make sense of this? What is, I mean, I understand that we don't know scientifically, but as a scientist, how do we frame this? And I have ways, I don't know that I believe them, I have ways to frame it, but I'm curious how you view it.
I don't have an explanation. I don't even go there. Let's say, in terms of trying to explain it. From having these experiences, which was one of my very elating experiences in one of the constellations, I go to Eastern philosophy and read the people's diaries who have felt the knowing, felt the connection, felt, it's like Diana, I don't know if you know Professor Diana Pasulka, who is a professor of religious studies, and describes how saints, have these cities in Eastern tradition, or that's what also Dean Radin describes in one of his books, of these extra abilities that people have somehow once they touch the divine, if you wish. Once they believe that they are being touched by, or they feel that they are divine power themselves. And so I started reading those people's diaries of how they come to that feeling, what happened to them, what was the event, and then how does they teach others, why do people want to know? How do they describe that experience, and how do they explain? People come with very mundane things, like I feel sad, I don't know what to do with it. And then they will start talking to them and sadness would lift. And there's no psychology like I would do in a session, available to that. And it's not like in family constellation that a specific phrase was said that was never unsaid and needed to be said, which you could kind of, logically you can say, well, finally they could have looked in the mirror, I don't know. They could have, had another way of talking. But to me, they describe that there is the loving connection, the Eastern philosophy, that there is this, when you are in a state of love, perception, and acceptance, certain things start to unfold and release happens. And the people come to these teachers, or people who write diaries of being with teachers, they feel this pull, but also development of qualities of love that they have not experienced before, but they were so familiar that they would start to tear up. And that feeling, almost like we were talking about that field, the word field, that that person invokes in them because they admire them. I don't know. Sometimes people don't know why, that happens, or why they're pulled to be with that person. And there's no obvious trigger of why the person feel that they've been released, cured, elated, or connected, or had this divine presence. But like a really good example, which I really like, is Ram Dass. And I'm trying to think of his Richard Alpert, right? His actual academic, the name. So he was a Harvard clinical psychologist, and they eventually had LSD, and they wanted to explain what was happening with them. What was that experience? Where was that vision? What was that sensation? And so they went to Eastern traditions to see if they have an explanation in traditions. And so in one of the I won't go into a longer story, and I encourage everyone who is listening to actually go and listen from Richard Alpert's or Ram Dass's words. But I very much can relate to his thought process as he describes it when he's meeting his guru. And so he's sitting with his guru, and his guru is telling him that things about his mother that nobody knows. He can't possibly know. So his mind goes in overdrive, trying to solve the problem. How could he possibly know? Who told him? Where did this information come from? And at some point, when he told him so many things, and also tells him in the language that he doesn't speak, so that he names it in English, the organ that the reason his mother passed away. And in this impossibility, when the mind can no longer work, something breaks open, because there was such pain and tension that he was experiencing, which is even happened the night before, which was even more pertinent. So how could he know when he never shared that with anyone? And in that tension, but I understand later what Ram Dass experiences with this person is that that person accepts everyone in who they are, no matter what they do. So it's that being in the field of acceptance. I mean, I don't have another word of love.
You're describing God. I mean, you're describing the place that people put God, that there is an entity, a power greater than yourself that is in a state of constant acceptance and love of you, right? It's that eternal parent that, that is, and I'm not saying this is necessarily my perspective, but that is our origin. It's our destiny. This is what religious traditions for thousands and thousands of years, have tried to articulate. And it has been suggested that many of these early mystical traditions from thousands and thousands of years ago, before we even have a record of, the Code of Hammurabi or the Old Testament and things like that, that predating that, there was a place, right, where people would drop into and touch that was a place of love. It was not a place of control. It was not a place of organized religion and the patriarchy and all the rules and restrictions and customs, right? It was a place of love. It's the seat of our consciousness, right? Is the larger consciousness that theoretically produced us all. And that's what so many people who have near-death experiences are talking about, people who have psychedelic experiences and are in touch with that familiar, warm, bright love, right? That unconditional love. I didn't mean to make you describe God, but you're kind of describing God.
Yes, and that's interesting. And so what I found is that in my exploration, right, and I'm not the first discoverer, as we know historically, like people experience this in many modalities, but I found that quality, that field that we create by experiencing pieces of it through our life, and when they come together in that soup of qualities of love, when we are able to experience or touch that in this unfearful, right, unworried, open and relaxed space, something triggers, and you could say healing or realization or perception or letting go or something happens. And so the family constellation, for example, coming back to that, if, there is a person who is very observant and open and not directive, actually, that they're not directing, but allowing things to unfold because there's one big rule in family constellation that you do not say bad things about the person who is not present, right? So it's all about the idea in constellation is letting the love flow. And if it flows correctly, there's a release happens at various places. And to me, it's the person who is in the constellation experiences or is touched what they've been having a glimpse of, but they have a more acceptance of that. And people who are in constellation allow them and their family to be accepted and be themselves, which is that state that we're describing, being loved unconditionally, whatever happens. And sometimes some of the situations are very horrific that we wouldn't even be able to talk about, but being accepted and feeling that, allowing that possibility to unfold and allowing that moment of experience. Sometimes in Eastern religions, what I'm observing is all that's required. It's for that little opening for the quality of love or presence of God.
The notion is not simply like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's my dad. But the notion is that when you place someone in an environment of acceptance, of openness, of that kind of care, something cracks open in them. I mean, it makes me think of also, the work that we now know to do with people who are in a coma, with people who have different mental capacity than other people, with senior citizens that, in many aspects of our culture, right, are just kind of put away somewhere where we don't have to look at them. It changes the way we think about possibility, not just when we do different modalities, but when we show that we are connected, that we have acceptance, that we have care. Love then becomes this universal language, like truly, right? And for many people, they would say God is that universal language, which, is not that far off from a lot of the sort of quantum explanations and all the, astrophysics explanations of the foundations of the universe. That's what came before.